Good morning. Welcome to The Human Author, episode 10. My name is Jen Cantwell, and today I'm going to be working on the fifth book in my Light Chaser series called The Warning. If you're into this live stream, you can always stop by for the first 10 minutes of each stream to hear what I wrote the day before. And also, if you're new, you might want to go back to episode 1 just to hear more about why I'm choosing to work in this way. A reminder, or not a reminder, but a hope that we will not get hit with too many power tools today. I think it's the last day, so hopefully next week it'll be nice and silent. So I'm going to go ahead and read the work that I did yesterday and then get moving. I am on chapter 6. I was still just as exhausted as I'd been the night before, the adrenaline having drained out of me. I looked down at Brennan, but he just stared ahead blankly. "Why did you follow us?" I asked. "You could have died just now. It was a stupid thing to do." He looked up at me and frowned. "What else was I supposed to do? I can't stay with them." "Why not? And what about Regan? Where is she?" "I don't know," he said. "She followed Egan when they took him and your grandmother. She made me hide in the closet in your grandmother's flat, so when they came, they didn't see me. Right before they opened the door, Regan took me by the shoulders and made me promise to leave the city and look for you. She told me that you could protect me." He looked up at me, sadness in his eyes. "Was she right?" I was forcefully reminded of my experience with Quinn, the way that he had been my charge, my job to guard him against all Torin represented. Quinn had been younger than Brennan. Now Brennan seemed to be the young one. He was only 12, not quite old enough to travel on his own, and yet Regan had sent him after us. If only she'd realized what a difficult errand she was sending him on. "I'm glad I finally found you," he said, "even if you're mad." He looked up at Kenneth. "Thanks, I guess." Kenneth glared down at him. "I don't need a stowaway on this journey. You should go back to the others. It's not safe out here for kids." I laughed at this, then quieted myself, wondered there were still 3 lawmen out in the forest. "For kids? We're kids." He shrugged. "Maybe, but it doesn't feel that way anymore, does it?" He had me, but my loss of a childhood seemed to date back several years, not just a few months. "In any case, you can't send him back," I said. "What if he gets lost?" "He won't. Will you?" He looked down at Brennan, but Brennan looked right through him. "When they left me behind, it was all I could do not to be a lawman. We'd only been there for a couple of weeks before it happened, so not that many people knew about me. I think Egan understood." He released my hand, looking down and wringing his together. "But Regan, I can't believe she was just trying to protect you," I said. "But Kenneth might be right. If you come with us, it could turn into a huge mess, and we won't be able to protect you either." "I know," he said, staring at the ground. "But if I'm going to die, I want it to be with my sister." I felt in the chest. His words were so sad. When I thought about all the things, all the ways Torin had managed to hurt the children who lived in our lands, it made my blood boil. "Fine," I said. "You can come." "Now, just a minute," Kenneth said. "He's going to slow us down. You know that." "On the contrary, he's the one who kept us alive the last time we met. He can find food for us, and he can run fast." I looked Brennan in the eye. "You realize you might not make it." He shrugged. "I might not, and the same goes for you." "He's coming with us," I finally said. "You can't do this," Kenneth said, clearly irritated. "I won't allow it. You won't allow it?" I scoffed. Just who do you think is in charge here?" He raised his club, not to threaten me, but to show me his strength. In return, I conjured a little lightning in my right hand, then started playing with it, sending it back and forth against a tree. "Fine," he said. "We can go to him. Will that do?" I sighed. "I'm not looking to outrank you, but I know this kid. He deserves better from us than just hiding him in the forest." His sister, She's special. She was sort of reborn from a pool of light after everyone was certain she'd been killed. She's much different now, and I'd be surprised if she wasn't able to escape the dungeon on her own. Do you really think so? Brennan said, eyes wide. I looked down at him, and I couldn't help the sadness on my face. I don't know, but I do know you're not going to get anywhere without us. And neither are you, I said to Kenneth. Kenneth blew out an angry breath, then finally turned away from me and made his way deeper into the forest. When he didn't stop walking, I jogged to catch up with him. Where where do you think you're going? I asked. What about us? He was making more noise than was wise, his footfalls only slightly muffled by the dirt, and he was walking fast. We need to go deeper in. We should hide during the day, then walk at night. He looked behind him, and when he saw Brennan following us, he groaned. I still say this is a terrible idea. I chuckled. I couldn't help it. I was the type of person who always seemed to have plenty of terrible ideas. We'll be okay. Once we find his sister and my father, we'll have a much better chance at fighting for the city. I wasn't lying exactly, but it was the only thing I could think of to do first. We would liberate them. It would result in a cascade of fighters to take on Zahn. This should be okay, Kenneth said, pointing at a small group of trees. Are you sure you want to come? I asked. You don't have to. He didn't answer me, just shook his head and sat down with his back up against a tree. We should rest here, I said to Brennan. We've been going all night. I peered through the trees, keeping an eye out for those other horsemen, the three who'd showed up with name. But the wood was. I sat down next to Kenneth, then took Brennan's hand and pulled him down next to me. Go to sleep now, I said. We'll leave when it gets dark again. Brennan laid down on the ground, but his eyes stayed wide open, looking at the canopy above. I couldn't force him to sleep, but I went ahead and laid down too. When I saw Kenneth still sitting stubbornly awake, I knew there was nothing I could do. You take first watch, I said, but you'll need to rest too, don't you think? He looked strung out, and it reminded me of me searching for the one thing I knew would set me right. But not anymore. I'd made my decision. So, as I closed my eyes, I focused not on Zahn's pool, but on Zahn himself, and I found myself eager to find him, to put him down. Had I become a murderer? A monster? I still wondered if, when we found her, Regan would be able to see right through me, but that was a worry for a different day. I woke up to the sound of Brennan crying. For a moment, I got ready to fight. Then I realized he was still half asleep, crying from whatever dream he was having. I reached out my hand and brushed the hair out of his eyes, but he didn't wake. I sat up and saw Kenneth, who looked terrible. It's your turn, I said. You need rest too. He shook his head. I can't defend you if I'm asleep. I laughed. Do you really think I need to be defended? Have I not shown you the power I have? He shrugged. I guess, but when I saw you walk away today, I frowned. You were there? When Zahn attacked me? Of course I was there. Everyone was. And most everyone was sorry to see you go. Zahn must have realized this, as it wasn't long after that he began rounding people up. This was a revelation for me. Kenneth, my old friend, looking out for me? Has it been this whole time that people have been imprisoned? I asked. Did they start that day? It only took a few days for him to come up with whatever plan it is he has. Then it was only a matter of time for him to rally supporters. How many were there? I asked. I don't know. Half? This took the wind right out of me, and I tried to imagine half the kingdom under lock and key. I couldn't help but wonder who was feeding them, if anyone. Come on, I said. You need sleep as much as anyone. I'll keep watch. He peered out from behind our little hiding spot, scanning the woods for a threat he hadn't yet seen. I don't think there's anything there, I said, and I'm not helpless. Trust me, I'll wake you if anything happens. Finally, he relented and lay back in the dirt. Just an hour. I raised an eyebrow. Only an hour? Promise me, he said. I sighed, irritated myself, but then I nodded my head. You're the leader. And finally, he closed his eyes. That night and the few that followed, we made it a point to travel in the dark. It didn't take more than a day for us to make it to the end of the trees, and after that it was open grassland, followed by desert. I knew how to put up a shield, and I was ready to defend us with one if necessary, but we didn't see another soul on our journey. While searching for threats on the horizon, something that was easy to do when the moon was high, I saw something I didn't expect, something I'd forgotten about: the tortoise. My heart leapt at the sight of him in the distance, an enormous round shell blocking the view to the wildlands beyond. It was all I could do to keep myself from to him. Kenneth seemed concerned. What is that thing? He asked. It's a keeper, I said. He'll have light for us. All right. That's that. Let me get to my document. There we go. Okay. Just a moment. Open quote. But light is dangerous, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. You know there's none in the kingdom, period, close new line. Open quote. Dangerous? Question mark. Since when? Question mark, close quote. New line. Open quote. Since always, comma, close quote, he said, period, open quote. It's been outlawed ever since you left, comma, even before that, period, close quote. New line, open quote. Who told you it was dangerous? Question mark, close quote, new line. He shrugged, period, open quote. My family, comma, undo, semicolon. They've told me for years to stay away from you and your father, period. I knew asking you for magic was against the law, comma, but I've never gone close to tasting light, period, close quote, new line, open quote. Well, comma, you're in for a treat, period, close quote. I looked down at Brennan, period, open quote. Did you get any the last time we were together, question mark, from the horse, question mark, close quote, new line, open quote. No, comma, close quote, he said, period, open quote. Only Regan, period. And your father refused to allow it, period. We didn't get any light the entire way home, semicolon. His home, period, close quote, new line, open quote. I stopped walking, period. Open quote. Your home now, comma, too, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. You know that, period, close quote, new line, open quote. He walked a few steps ahead of me, comma, then turned back, period, open quote. I don't have a home, period. The only home I have is Regan, comma, and we've never been safe, period. Never, period, close quote, new line. I sighed, comma, knowing enough about his past to understand that he was right, period. But had any of us been safe? Question mark. New line. Maybe not, comma. But his short childhood had more than torturous, period. He won that argument, period. New line, open quote. We're going to make it that way, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. You can help us get into the city, comma, but I'm going to want you to hide once we're inside the walls, period. Close quote, new line. He stood up tall, comma, turned and walked away, period. Open quote. I won't be hiding anywhere, period. Close quote, new line. Maybe he was right, comma. Maybe I should let him join us in the fight, period. But I still wasn't ready to allow a 12-year-old to fight an evil wizard and his master, period. New line. I followed after him, period. Open quote. Well, comma, you'll have to stick close by then, period. And it will be dangerous, period. New line. Undo. Close quote. New line. I considered the fact that I would have to kill again, period. Had I become a monster? Question mark. I didn't know yet, comma, but as I thought back to my hands wrapped around Colm's neck, comma, I thought the answer was there for me, comma, just out of reach, period. We walked on for another hour before we spoke again, comma. And when the silence was broken, comma, it was Kenneth to do it, period. New line, open quote. I'm not so sure about this idea, comma, close quote, he said. Period. Open quote. I've never seen a cap keeper before, period. They've always told us how dangerous they are. Period, close quote, new line. Open quote. Well, comma, they're big, comma, that's for sure. Comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. And it's true that some of them can be dangerous. Semicolon. They're called fiends, comma, and they hide out and look just like cap keepers, period. But the tortoise isn't one of them, period. He could have killed me long ago if he'd wanted to, period. It's the ram we have to watch out for, period. Close quote, new line. Open quote. The ram? Question mark. There's a big one of him, comma, 2, question mark. How many cap keepers are there? Question mark, close quote, new line. I put my hand on Brennan's shoulder as we walked, period, comma, speaking to him as well, period. New line. I'm not undo, close quote. Open quote. I'm not sure, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. But I've seen plenty of them, period. Mostly, comma, they're helpful, comma, and if they allow you to take the light, comma, well, comma, that's the best outcome from any meeting with a cap keeper, period. Close quote, new line. I kept walking, comma, eager to make it to the tortoise, comma, hoping in the back of my mind that he still had cap light in his pool, period. New line, open quote. Okay, comma, close quote, Kenneth said, period, open quote. If you're sure, period, close quote, new line. I smiled in his direction, period, open quote. You know, comma, it's okay for you to trust me, period. You and I, comma, we have history, period. Isn't that enough? Question mark, close quote, new line. Open quote. He paused for a moment, comma, thinking, comma, then, comma, open quote. I guess you're right, period. But you need to listen to me, comma, too, period. If we're going to do this together, comma, we're going to need one another. Trust. Period. Close quote. New line. Open quote. And what about me? Question mark. Close quote. Brennan asked. Period. Open quote. I can help. Period. Close quote. New line. Open quote. We can deal with that argument when we get there, comma, close quote, Kenneth said sharply, period. New line. I squeezed Brennan's shoulder, comma, and he backed off, period, comma, understanding my intention, period. New line. Open quote. Well, comma, before we do, you'll get to meet the one who told me what was coming for me, comma, close quote, I said, period. He's the one who, undo, open quote. He's the one who told me about Torin, comma, and even though I didn't want to believe him at first, comma, proof of the prophecy he'd related to me had manifested ever since I'd left him, period. New line. I, close quote, new line, open quote. This Torin, comma, close quote, Kenneth went on, period, open quote. I've not heard of him, comma, period. Who is he? Question mark. Is he working with Zahn? Question mark. Close quote. New line. I sighed, period, open quote. I don't know, comma, but I'd be surprised if not, period. Close quote. New line. But would I really be? Question mark. I'd always considered the possibility that Zahn was working alone, comma, and if it were true, comma, then the danger would be much worse, period. New line. I thought back to the visions I'd had in the forest, comma, wondering if somehow they'd been real, period. Well, they're not breaking concrete, but they're out there hammering. Sorry. Of any of them, comma, Cap grandmother had been the most important I'd seen, period. Person. Maybe she had been a figment of my imagination, comma. But somehow I didn't think so, period. New, maybe she was a ghost, period. New line. This thought stopped my breathing, comma. And for a moment, comma, I felt despair, period. New line. You always knew this would happen, period. You knew people would die, period. New line. Maybe, comma. But I hadn't counted on it being my own family, period. I wondered if they'd been targeted because of Torin. Period. There's the power tools. That's so fun and exciting. If so, comma, it only upped the ante for me to track him down, period. New line. I wondered what would happen to me when I finally did, period. As easy as it had been to walk away from Zahn, question mark. Zahn had seemed to give me everything he had, comma, eager to kill me, period. But maybe that was the hint I needed now, period, comma. For if that were true, comma, Torrent couldn't possibly be behind it, period. I thought about the book at the bottom of my bag, comma, only my name remaining on its pages, period. New line. I wondered why he hadn't killed me yet, period. It had been months, comma. Yet I'd only ever seen his servants or my own hallucinations of him, period. No, comma. I knew he wanted to do the deed himself, period. New line. I sat up, comma, eager now to make it to the tortoise, period. Comma. Hoping he had more counsel for me, period. New line. Kenneth lagged behind, comma. Clearly nervous about moving forward toward such a beast, period. New line, open quote. We're not going to get there fast enough if you insist on crawling, comma, close quote. I called back to him, period. New line, open quote. This time, comma, he was the one jogging to keep up with me, period. New line, open quote. It's not the tortoise I'm worried about right now, comma, close quote. He said, period. Oh, look, period, close quote. He pointed in a different direction, comma, back toward Eagleview, period. And then I saw it, period. Semicolon. 3 men on horses riding in our direction, period. New line. Open quote. Drop. Exclamation point, close quote, I said, comma, and all 3 of us hit the ground, comma, protected by the 3-foot 3 grass that surrounded us, period. New line. After a few minutes, comma, we could hear beats, comma, period. Then, comma, when they got closer, comma, their voices, period. New line. Open quote. They slowed their horses to a walk, period. New line, open quote. We need to be more careful, comma, close quote, one of them said, period. Open quote. She could be anywhere, period, close quote. Now, comma, search, period, close quote, new line. Open quote. I don't understand the problem, comma, close quote. Came another voice, period. Open quote. We know where they are, period. Better for us to make haste than to lose her, period. Close quote. New line. Open quote. I don't know that we do know where she is, period. The girl moves fast, comma, and she's tricky, period. I've met her before, back in town, comma. And she's always been ... slippery, period. Keep your eyes open, period, close quote. New line. Apparently, The leader of the group settled on trotting away versus galloping, comma. But I felt an enormous measure of relief when I heard them passing us by, period. I looked over at Kenneth, period. Once, again, period. New line. Open quote. That was close, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. How long should we stay down? Question mark, close quote. New line, open quote. That depends, period. How far to the tortoise? Question mark, close quote. Brennan squeezed my hand, period. Open quote. I don't want to go, period. Close quote, new line, open quote. Why? Question mark. Close quote, I asked, period. Open quote. You know the cap keepers are good, comma. At least most of them, period. Close quote, new line. Undo. Open quote. I've never been to the tortoise, period. How do you know? Question mark, close quote. New line. It was then that I realized I didn't know, period. How could I be 100% certain that he had my best interests at heart? Question mark. Close quote. New line. Intuition, period. New line. Open quote. It's true that the tortoise didn't have good news for me the last time I saw him, comma, quote, I said, period. Open quote. But what he told me might be the ticket to saving us all, period. I didn't want to believe him, comma, and it took me months before I did, period. But Torrens trackers came after me, comma, and that was all it took, period. You remember that, comma, don't you? Question mark, close quote. New line. Open quote. But what if the tortoise was the one to send them after us? Question mark. Close quote. New line. Kenneth looked over at us, comma, groaning, period. Open quote. Between the two, I won't be surprised if we get caught well before we get to the gates of Eagleview, period. Be quiet, comma, and let's get moving, period. The moon is about to set, comma, and the darkness will be complete, period. That was a close call with the lawmen, comma, semicolon. We would be stupid to get into that situation again, period. The sooner we make it to the tortoise, comma, the better, period. At least, comma, according to her, period, close quote. He nodded his head in my direction, period. According to me? Question mark. Since when had he decided against trusting me? Question mark. New line. I was just about to ask him this question when he stood up and began whiskly away, period. I scrambled after him, comma, and Brennan right behind me, period. New line. Open quote. What's the rush? Question mark, close quote, I asked. Period, open quote. 5 minutes ago, you wanted our journey, comma, to not see him at all, period. What has changed? Question mark, close quote. New line. He turned and crossed his arms, period, open quote. It's just that you're right, period. You have magic, comma, and I don't, period. You worried about me not trusting you, semicolon. Well, comma, I guess time will tell, period. Close quote. New line. Page break, period. The night dragged on, comma, and we were hungry once more, period. Without the light of the moon to guide us, comma, all we could do was put one foot in front of the other and have the courage to keep moving, period. I looked down, excuse me, at Brennan, comma, and he seemed resolved now, period. I wasn't sure if it was my words or Kenneth's that had gotten through to him, comma, but I was pleased that he was following without argument, period. New line. As the sun began to lighten the sky on the horizon, comma, we slowed, period. New line, open quote. He's just there, comma, close quote, I said, comma, pointing, period. Open quote. I can see him, period. Close quote, new line. It was all I could do to not break into a run, comma. We were so close, period. But even I knew that we weren't close enough to risk walking in the day. Light of day, period. New line. Open quote. No, comma, close quote, Kenneth said with superiority, period. Open quote. It will have to be tonight, period. Close quote. He nodded to Brennan, period. Open quote. He needs to sleep, comma, and we all need to eat, period. Close quote. New line. Brennan produced a handful of salad greens he'd found as the night had worn on, period. Then, he sat down in the grass and made 3 little piles, period. New line. I followed suit and picked up the one intended for me, period. I stuffed the first bite into my mouth, but it was difficult not to spit it out, period. We will have been eating nothing but the grass we were walking through, period. New line. I looked up at him and smiled, pretending that it was delicious, period. But he knew it was a lie, period. New line, open quote. It will keep us alive, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. Regan and I never had enough to eat from cap lifters, period. She would hunt, and I would gather, period. It kept us alive then, and it will do the same now, period. Can you get us water? Close quote. New line. I was happy to have a task to do other than eat, period. I made a small basin out of the earth and put my hands on top of it, calling water, drawing it from the dirt, period. New line, open quote. There you go, close quote, I said, period, open quote. I was sure not to take the first sip, myself, but to save it for these two, my companions. My friends, period, close quote. Brennan bent over the basin eagerly, then put his mouth right to the surface of the water and drank deeply, period. New line. Kenneth looked on, waiting for his turn, period. When I'd first done this for him, he'd been untrusting, period. In fact, this whole time, he'd seemed to carry that mistrust with him with every step he took, period. New line, open quote. Is it me, ? Close quote, I said, as Brennan came up for air, period. Open quote. Kenneth, ? Is it me you don't trust, ? Quote, new line. He shook his head, but didn't answer, semicolon. Instead, he bent over the pool and drank his fill, period. When he sat up again, he addressed my question, period, new line, open quote. It's been a long time since I could trust and, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. Surely you understand that, period, close quote, new line. Maybe I did, period. Open quote. Does that mean I shouldn't trust you? Question mark. Close quote, new line. Face fell with this question, comma, and then hardened, period. Open quote. You can trust me, comma, whether you actually do or not, period. It's important you know that, period. That day you left, comma, I drew my father away, comma, not willing to acclaim the prize for having found you, period. I think it all began that day, comma, the way I began to extricate myself from my family, period. I'd taken a hit for what I'd done, comma, and I had a black eye for a week, period. You can trust me, period. Close quote, new line. I didn't know what to say to this, period. I'd had my own fights with family, comma, my father having taken a swipe at me more than once as I'd come up, period. I wondered what it would take for Kenneth to forgive his family, period. I'd forgiven mine, comma, but had shown himself to have changed, comma, and for the rest of our journey, he didn't touch me again, period. New line. Open quote. I do, comma, close quote, I said, comma, even though I had just come to this realization, comma, this determination, period. Open quote. Finally, comma, he laid back in the grass with us, comma, seemingly having come to the conclusion that he needed to rest, comma, too, period. New line, open quote. I need to sleep, comma, close quote, he said, open quote. Will you keep watch, question mark, close quote, new line, open quote. Of course I will, close quote, I said, period, open quote. You too, comma, kiddo, period, close quote. I elbowed Brennan, comma, and while he looked up at me, comma, his eyes asking me to allow him to help, comma, I shook my head, period, open quote. If anyone needs rest, comma, it's you, period. You've been gathering all night, comma, and we have all day, to get ready for our next part of the journey, period. The next part of our journey, period. Close quote. New line. He wanted to argue, comma, that much was clear, comma, but he didn't, period. Somewhere inside, he recognized that I was in charge of him, period. Maybe it had even brought him comfort, period. New line, open quote. Get me up when you get him up, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. Promise, period, close quote, new line. I smirked down at him, comma, shoving my pack for him to keep under his head as a pillow, period. New line. I didn't promise, comma. Semicolon. I didn't say another word, period. Instead, comma, I kept low, comma, just peeking over the tops of the blades of grass that blew in the wind, period. In the distance, comma, I saw the lawmen riding away toward where the others were hiding, period. New line. I hoped they had people on the lookout, period. I didn't know what they did when it was time. We were too far away to help them now, period. Maybe Kenneth had trained them to be cautious, period. Whether or not they were, comma, I certainly was, period. And while I longed for nothing more than to run through the morning until we got to the tortoise, comma, I settled in for what would be the next several hours as I kept watch, period. Okay, that's it for today. 2,408 words. I'm doing pretty well, I think. This has been a really interesting as far as speed goes. So, and I'm feeling good about things. Anyways, thank you for joining me. And I'll be back here on Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific. I hope I will see you then. Thanks.